welcome to the Art of Being Human. Now, we have talked about emotions, the deep emotions, emotional problems. I would like to start today and do a little bit on the mind, cognitive things. Now, what does it mean? The word cognitive means your mind. If you have a cognitive dysfunction, and this is basically what we're going to be talking about today, a cognitive dysfunction is when you don't think right. You have difficulties in thinking. Now, it may be that there's some retardation involved. It may be there's some dementia involved. You do not understand. You do not speak right, but the problem is you can't think right. And I know all kinds of people that have cognitive dysfunctions. We usually don't use that term, but no one really wants to use the term retarded. I don't see why not. It is what it is. If a person is retarded, they can't think at the level that most people can think. They can't reason out things. But there are a lot of people who have learning disabilities, and when they have learning disabilities, they can't think right either. They may be brilliant. They may be absolutely brilliant in every area of their life, but they have trouble understanding what they read. They can read, but they can't describe what they read. Somehow the brain just doesn't lock on to it. Or they have trouble with directions, or they have trouble in some way. But I'm speaking more today in terms of the emotional sense of cognitive difficulties. When you don't think right, and so therefore it affects your emotional responses to things. And this is a term that's used for it. David Burns wrote a book on cognitive dysfunctions, and he talks about the way that we think that may not be right. Now, these are not the same as the mechanisms, the defense mechanisms that we have discussed earlier. On the defense mechanisms, I discussed the way that most people react to stress in their lives. It has nothing to do, or nothing directly to do, with their mental thinking or their ability to think. Some people work extra hard, some people use rationalization, or they substitute one thing for another. I mean, that's a whole set of things, and we discussed that. There are about 10 different defense mechanisms. But when you're talking about cognitive dysfunction, we're talking about how your thinking, which may not be as accurate as you think, can affect your emotional responses to things. And so therefore, that's cognitive, that's your mind, that's your thinking process. And people who are thinking in a certain way always think they're thinking accurately. If you talk to a person who has a problem like that, say they believe that men from Mars are coming down to take pictures of us so that they can inhabit our planet. I know that's extreme, but there are mentally ill people that think like this. So I'm just using it as an example, and I'm not thinking of any specific case at all. And so supposing a person does believe that, though, then it's hard. You can't get them to understand that isn't rational. That isn't how things work. You don't have, as far as I know, men from Mars coming down to take pictures of Earth. But yet there are people who believe in UFOs that think that's a definite possibility. Is their mind disordered? Well, it may be. If they believe it, if they really believe it, or they believe that they saw a person from Mars and it affected the way that they thought and pictures were taken, I can't see how that can possibly be. I did work with a woman once who thought that her body was half alive and half dead. And I worked with a psychiatrist on this. We were talking with, I did the counseling, he did the medicating, and it worked out pretty well. We got her medicated to the point that her mind was thinking more clearly, but she still believed that she had a half-live body. And you know, you can't reason with people who have a cognitive dysfunction like that, because what they're going to do is they're going to twist everything around to agree with what they think is going on. You know, I knew, this is a true story. It was told to me by a psychologist who worked in a mental hospital. There was one patient who believed he was dead. And they tried to get the reason why he would think he was dead, because obviously he was alive. He says, dead men don't bleed. And so they decided that they would have to show him that he would bleed, and so therefore he wasn't dead. That was the whole idea of it. They worked with him for weeks on this. And finally, one day, they had somebody made a little cut or something just so a little bit of blood would come. And he looked at it and he says, oh, dead men do bleed. But he still had that concept that he was dead. You see, that didn't change. So when I worked with a woman who thought that she was half dead and half alive, I could have shown her physiology charts. I could have shown her pictures of how the heart pumps blood and how it circulates around the body and how it comes back up and it's aerated and all of that. I could have done all of that with her, but it wouldn't change her basic thought that she was half alive and half dead. The only thing we could do, I talked with her every week. It was the same thing every week, but she was a delightful person. I really liked her. And she says, I'm half dead and I'm half alive. So we'd start every week that I saw her and we'd go through the explanations. That's probably not true. You're walking, you're breathing, you're talking, you're moving around. It's likely that your whole body is alive. If it wasn't, how could you walk? How could you breathe? How could you talk? Well, I'm dead on part of my body and the other part is alive. It's very, very, very hard to take a person who has some kind of an idea like that and change it back to what was normal. I knew she wasn't half dead, but that's what she believed. The medication that we gave her was antipsychotic medication, and that would help her so she could function normally. But we were never able to get rid of that thought process in her. It was just innate. If we hadn't given her the medication to kind of ease that psychotic reaction, then what would happen was that she would have probably had to have been hospitalized in a mental hospital. But we were able to keep her out of a mental hospital just by giving her the medication that she needed and keep her stable enough so she could walk, talk, breathe, move, do the things that she usually did, even though that concept of I'm half dead, I'm half alive never really quite left her. Anyway, what about your emotions? People who are anxious and depressed have typical ways of thinking. As I said, this is not the same as the defense mechanisms that I have already talked about, but there are certain styles of thinking and certain ways of thinking that are non-productive, that are due to emotional problems, and they are just plain off. And if you understand that, you might be able to see, you understand the process that's going on and what they think. So I'm going through these one by one by one. It'll probably take 2 segments to do it, but remember, sometimes we all have periods of time when our thinking isn't quite right. I'm not judging people whose thinking isn't quite right, because we all have those times when we're sick or something has happened to us, and temporarily our brain isn't functioning at full speed. I remember I was told when I had my coronary arteries unplugged, when I had the quad bypass, this was quite a few years ago, that the medications that they give you and the anesthesia that they give you is so deep that when you get out of it, it's heart surgery, open heart surgery, so it has to be deep. When you get out of it, you do show some symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Your thinking is not clear, and you do make mistakes in your thinking, but that's due to the medication, which, by the way, stays in your system a long time. You don't get rid of some of that medication and some of the anesthesia when you wake up out of your surgery. It lasts in your system, and your system has to gradually get rid of it, but it does affect your thinking process. Illness will affect your thinking process. Trauma will affect your thinking process. If you've been abused, your thinking process is definitely affected, because usually you think that you're to blame for the abuse, and you blame yourself, and then you have negative self-concept about yourself that just really shouldn't be there, not real. So we have to keep on reassuring people, the abuse is not your fault. You didn't cause it. You had no right to have to experience this, but it happened anyway. There's a power battle going on, and the abuser has the power, and the person who's being abused does not have the power. So it's kind of a power thing. So at any rate, we have to understand that various things that happen to us can change our thinking, and as a result of that, we may end up with thinking which is probably not accurate. So it's not a case of judgment. It's a case of, you may find as I talk about this that you can kind of tap in, oh, that's what I do. That's the kind of thinking I have, especially if you had problems. Or maybe you just can kind of breeze through it and say, no, I don't do that, I'm fine. But there are a number of them. I think probably about 10 is what I'm going to discuss. These are what we call cognitive distortions, a change or inaccurate way of thinking due possibly to things that have happened to you or something that's going on with your brain. Maybe the neurotransmitters aren't right, but I want to go through these one by one. Okay, so one of them is called all or nothing thinking. And a lot of us do it. This is not uncommon. When you think in extremes, everything is black or white, nothing's gray. The world is either awful or the world is okay. You know, there's no, I have good things in my life, I have challenging things in my life. That would be normal to say because everybody does. And that's not a problem. But it's all or nothing. Things are good or bad. There's no gray area. Instead of getting an A in a course, you got a C in a course at an exam. And so what do you say? I failed the test. No, you didn't. You got a C in the test. You did not fail a test. You had to have some answers right or you wouldn't have got the C. You would have got an F, a flunked grade. So, but your emotions are, I failed. I failed because I didn't get an A. And that's my fault. I failed, and so therefore, what does it turn into? A bad self-concept. I'm not a natural student. I don't do things right. I never do things right. I'm always bad. Everything happens to me as bad. I never do well. Now, doesn't that sound like all or nothing thinking? Instead of, I did get a C on a course. It's too bad because I wanted to get an A. I wanted to get an all-A average. But instead, I got the C. So I didn't do as well as I wanted to do on this test. But everything else I did fine on. And so therefore, my grade point average is pretty high. You know, and that would be realistic. But if you say, I got a C in a test, I messed up the whole thing. I played a solo. I got 3 notes wrong. Therefore, I messed up the whole solo. It's a disaster. I'm a terrible musician. And it doesn't even make sense. Now, I'm going to exaggerate this, but it's not so far from real. Even if I exaggerate it, this is the way some people think. They think in this exaggerated fashion. Everything is good or everything is bad. If everything is bad, that means everything. I may have done well on something, but that doesn't count because I failed. In my own mind, I failed. So therefore, what went well really doesn't count anymore. Or I did great. So therefore, everything counts the way I wanted to. Because I got the grade I wanted to, everything is fine. Because I got the grade I didn't want, everything is bad. We shouldn't think in an all or nothing way, because it puts us in jeopardy in our thinking. We can't think reasonably if we think that everything goes down because of a minor mistake, or everything goes up and there's no gray area, there's no average gray area. Well, then we're not thinking properly. We're not enjoying life either, because when we do have a problem, if we do miss a beat somewhere, then suddenly everything is awful. I'm just crucified. I will never get into that college because I missed a question. I never worry about that stuff. I really don't. But as you get older, things that were critical to you when you're younger don't even seem to be that critical anymore. So your thinking pattern can change with age. It can be more normal with age, or it can be more normal with other events in your life when you realize that everything is not based on that one thing, that one grade, that one interview, whatever it is that you're dealing with. Not everything is based upon that. Life is composed of many, many different things, and we experience those many things every day. The weather, how we feel, how we're dressed, what happens in politics, what happens in the news, what's happening in my job, all of that. And if we get to the point where we're thinking only one way and not another way, and it's either all good or it's all bad, then we're missing most of our life, because people don't live all good or all bad. People live in terms of these are the things that are going on, and some of them are good and some of them are challenging, but we're working with that. And by and large, everything is good. Once in a while, something crops up that's not good. But that doesn't mean everything has gone bad either. If one thing goes bad, everything else may still be good. So you have to keep your eye out. If you're the kind of person that's always thinking in terms of everything's bad or everything's good, it's like saying colors. Either they're white or they're black. What about gray, red, green, yellow, orange, all of the other colors? What about them? Do they not count? So at any rate, it's just something for you to think about. Now, I remember I was supposed to go to Ohio State University, this is a few years back, and I was going to be mentored by somebody in the psychology department of the University of Ohio. And the idea was he wanted me to get my PhD with his leadership. He would mentor me because he had met me at a conference. It was a 6-week conference. It was a long one at the University of Maine. And he was doing research in perception, and I was really interested in that. And as a result of that whole 6-week experience, I wrote a book in perception that was very well reviewed. And I dedicated it to 2 professors in that conference, and this one particular person was one of them. So he was trying to get me to go to Ohio State, and I was ready to quit my job and everything to go because I thought it would be a great idea to have the PhD under his leadership. Unfortunately, the grant didn't come through, and as it turned out, I couldn't go. And at the time, I was devastated, and it would have been time for me to think, well, everything is bad, everything is not good. But I didn't do that. I did stop. I was a college professor at the time. I did change and left the college and went to school in another school, got another degree, became a minister, which is much more suited to what I am anyway. And as a result of that, I have had an amazing life. So it turned out to be for the best. A lot of times things happen to you and you think they're awful at the time, but they're for the best in the long run. And if you can understand that, everything has a purpose. Everything that happens to you has a purpose. And when that purpose is fulfilled, then things may change again. But that's okay. It's like you're on a journey, and to say that one thing's going to prevent you from having happiness, that's not true. It doesn't have to be that way. And so I urge you, if you have a tendency to have this all or nothing thinking, everything is good, everything is bad, nothing in between, I urge you to start thinking, let's look at the things that are positive in your life. There's going to be some. And even though you may not recognize them, you consider, well, this is just average life. It's enjoying your life. It's having your family. It's being able to go out shopping. It's being able to do the things that you do. It's not predicated on one thing being bad. So your life is not predicated in that way. So you just need to think about that. Now, I think we don't have too much time left. I think I don't want to start something else and not be able to finish it. It would be another one of these cognitive dysfunctions. So I think I'll just stop it here, and we'll continue with the same thing in the next episode. So please join me. I would like to have you go through all of these with me because they are important and they do make you who you are. In many respects, they make you who you are. The way that you think defines you. So please join me next time, and we'll close it off here.